Hey, Live Youth Group. Thanks for joining us again here on a Wednesday night teaching. We're in, I think, week 5 here of this COVID-19 thing now. And so for tonight's kind of Bible lesson, I'm going to title it, Are You Listening? Now, story just to get us going. When I was growing up, my mom, if she wanted really to get my attention, like she needed to tell me something, she would reach her hand out and grab my shoulder. And she would tell me that if you could get a point of contact with somebody, like a physical point of contact, that they would pay attention to you more than if you didn't have that point of contact. And so, if I can't tell you how many times that I've been talking to someone, and maybe you've had the same experience where they ask you a question and your mind just drifts off or gets distracted by something, and you didn't really even hear their question. And I've had to say to someone, can you ask me that question again? It's not that you weren't clear. I wasn't listening, if I'm going to be honest. And so maybe you've experienced that too. And a physical point of contact is going to help us from drifting or being distracted. And I hope COVID-19 has been kind of like a physical point of contact for you. Maybe because it's just gotten you out of your routines and you're paying more attention because things are different for you. Almost like when we go away on a retreat or something like that, you're more attuned and it's like you're ready to listen. Or maybe COVID-19 has brought some type of pain in whatever variety it may come, relational, emotional, physical. And so maybe pain has kind of caused you to be attentive and tuned in. I want to read for you 2 quotes from C.S. Lewis in his book, The Problem of Pain. He says this, first, mental pain is less dramatic than physical pain, but it's more common and also more hard to bear. The frequent attempt to conceal mental pain increases the burden. It's easier to say, my tooth is aching, than to say, my heart is broken. And so we oftentimes are able to just hide emotional kinds of pain like that, as opposed to physical pain, where when you break a bone, you say, yeah, my pain level is at a 9. But we don't say that about our hearts or what's going on in our soul. Here's his second quote. He says this, we can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. Pain insists upon being attended to. Then he goes on to say, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. So C.S. Lewis's take on it was that God uses pain to just speak very clearly and loudly into our lives. And I want to just suggest or posit the fact that maybe COVID-19 is a season where we ought to be paying attention and listening and tuning into God. I want to just quickly walk through the Bible, actually backwards. We're going to walk backwards through the Bible and touch on 3 characters, Paul, Jesus, and Elijah. Okay? And so first, Paul, in 2 Corinthians 12, he describes this thorn in the flesh that's been given to him. And so Paul's got this thorn. We don't know what it is, whether it's a physical, emotional kind of pain, whatever it is, it's causing some kind of suffering in his life. He refers to it as this thorn in the flesh. So even though we don't know what it is, we do know that Paul asks God 3 times. He says, God, please take this away from me. And God's response is to not take it away. Actually, God's response is, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in weakness. And so through Paul's thorn, his pain, suffering of whatever kind, God's not concerned about, or God's plan is not to take that away or to relieve Paul of it, but actually to put his power on display through Paul's thorn in the flesh. All right, let's go to Jesus. We all know the story of Jesus and Lazarus, one of his good friends who passed away. But before Lazarus passes away, his sisters, Mary and Martha, send for Jesus and say, he's really sick. You got to come heal him. And Jesus' initial response to his disciples are, this isn't going to lead to death, but actually God's allowed this. He's allowed it to happen so that the Son of God may be glorified. So Jesus had an acute understanding that God was allowing this to happen in Lazarus' life, his sisters' lives, friends' lives, including himself, so that the Son of God might be glorified. And then Jesus finally gets there, and Lazarus has now been dead for 4 days. I think it was 4 days. But Lazarus has been dead. And as Jesus is calling Lazarus out of the tomb, right, kind of in his prayer to the Father, he says, I know you've allowed this to happen so that they might believe, so that everyone watching might be able to see through this circumstance that you have sent me, that they might believe in me and his power to raise Lazarus from the dead. All right, let's hop back now to Elijah. If you have your Bibles or want to turn there, this is where I just want to spend a few minutes, more than the other two. Pause the video even and read 1 Kings chapter 19. All right, are you back? Okay, seriously, pause it. Read 1 Kings 19. Verses 1 through 18 is where we're going to be looking. But just to give the context here, Elijah just experiences this major victory over the prophets of Baal, when he calls fire down out of heaven. And now his life's on the line because Jezebel is not real happy with him and threatens his life. So in verse 3 of chapter 19, we see that Elijah, he runs because he's afraid. He's afraid for his life. And suffering, pain, and circumstances like this, they cause fear to rise up in our hearts. And so just like Elijah, we run sometimes, but God doesn't run from us. Actually, an angel comes. And if you know the word for angel, it means someone who is sent. So God sends an angel to minister to Elijah. And he's under this broom tree. And Elijah wakes up, and this angel has hot cakes for him that were cooked on a stone in a jar of water. And Elijah goes back to sleep, and he's woken up again, and he's fed again. And this sustains Elijah through this really kind of bottom of the barrel place in his life, where he says to God prior to the cakes, he says, God, just end it. Have mercy on me. Take my life and just put me out of my misery. I'm done. He was finished. And I don't know if you've been to that, that far down in the barrel or not, but that's where Elijah was. He was just ready for it to be over. And God says, no, I'm gonna meet you where you are. And he meets his needs physically, and then he sustains him. And then he questions him in chapter 19. After Elijah runs again, he speaks to him in a cave, and he says, what are you doing here? And Elijah says, what do you mean? What do you mean? What am I doing? I've been standing up for you. And now my life's, I'm a wanted man. They're going to take my life. And God sends wind, an earthquake, and fire, and then a still small voice or a thin silence. And that thin silence catches Elijah's attention. He listens to God, and God says, what are you doing? Elijah gives him the same response. I'm living for you. I'm the only one left. And God says, no, I want you to understand up here that you're not the only one left. I've ministered to you. I'm with you. And I've also got 7,000 people that have not bowed their knee to Baal. And so God meets Elijah where he is, gives him a plan to follow through, and then encourages him that he's not alone. And so suffering, difficulty, pain, they drive us to a point where we recognize our frailty and we need to depend on God. And so if you've got an understanding that as a Christian, God's going to take suffering from you, it's just not the case. Okay, sometimes God uses suffering to speak to us. So 2 quick takeaways for you. Number 1, remember and be comforted by the fact that God is with you and he won't leave you. Okay, and he might be using this COVID-19 season to speak to you. So 2, the second takeaway is listen for him, seek him out, and follow him. Okay, all right, I love you guys. Look forward to this again next week, and anticipating giving you guys a big hug and a high five when we see you again. All right,